What's going on, you guys? My name is Steven, and today on Mad Electrician, I'm going to be showing you from start to finish how to install a level 2 hardwired EV charger that is brand new to a company called Legrand. If you or your customer owns an electrical vehicle, then this is a crucial addition to the home. So I'm going to walk you through all the steps that it takes to install this powerful charging station. And in full transparency, Legrand was generous enough to just go ahead and send me this EV charger so that way I could go ahead and make this installation video. And as a quick disclaimer, a project like this should really only be attempted by a certified electrician, as working with electricity can be both dangerous and deadly. So unless you're a certified electrician, don't try this at home. So without further ado, let's get this bad boy opened up and see what's inside. Let's see what we got inside the package. The first thing we have in the package is the Legrand EV charger itself, which, as you can tell, is a hardwired unit with the conductors and charging cable already attached. Next, we have the plug holster. This allows for the plug to be neatly and safely stored when not in use. Next is 3 feet of liquid-tight conduit for connecting the field wiring to the charging unit. Legrand includes this bag of hardware that you can use for mounting your holster and your EV charger. And they also include this liquid-tight connector that you can use to connect your liquid-tight to the panel or a junction box. In the second bag of hardware that Legrand includes, there's also a special Allen key. This is to be used with the included security screws. That way, if you install your EV charger and holster on the exterior of your home, nobody can steal it. They also include this template for mounting your EV charging bracket. Lastly, Legrand includes a set of instructions that you'll need to complete your EV install. And there's a lot of very important information on here. So all at once, here's everything that is included with your EV charger in the box. Regardless of where you install your EV charger, you're at least going to need a wrench, a screwdriver, a level, a meter, a tape measure, a pair of wire strippers, a drill, and something to mark with. Now, before we can get started with the installation, the first thing we have to figure out is where we want to install the EV charger. And there's a few things that you want to take into consideration when choosing your location. First, Legrand recommends that you mount your EV charger somewhere between 36 and 48 inches. So if you have an ideal spot where you think you want to mount it, just make sure that there's wall space somewhere within those heights. Now, if you're not planning on mounting your EV charger to a masonry wall, then ideally you're going to be using the included lag bolts, in which case you're going to want to try to find a stud to mount your EV charger to. My favorite stud finder is this Racketeer's stud ball stud finder, and the way this works is it magnetizes to screws that are holding up the drywall to the studs. So as you can see right here in this location, there's going to be a 2x4 stud. Also, if you do happen to find a location where you want to mount your EV charger and there's no stud there, that's not the end of the world. You'll just have to use some other anchors that aren't included with your Legrand charger in order to mount it to the wall. And probably the most obvious thing to consider is, where do you actually plan on parking your car? You want to make sure that wherever you mount this thing, your cable is going to be long enough to plug into your car and charge it. Now, with this particular EV charger from Legrand, you have an 18-foot long charging cable, which is pretty generous and really opens up a lot of possibilities for where you can mount this thing. This thing also has a NEMA 3 enclosure rating, which means that it is indoor and outdoor rated, and it has GFCI protection included. You're also going to want to consider the distance that you're going to mount your charger from the panel. In this particular case, the Legrand charger that I'm installing today is a hardwired unit, which means that at some point those conductors are going to have to tie into the panel. Now, Legrand includes a generous 3 feet of conductors as well as 3 feet of this liquid-tight flexible conduit. Now, if this is not going to be long enough to reach wherever I want to mount my EV charger, then I'm going to have to plan out some sort of other conduit run and junction box for this thing to tie into to eventually make its path all the way back to the panel. And as you can tell, when I mount my EV charger right here, that is not within 3 feet of the panel. So I will have to do some sort of a conduit run coming out of the panel, making its way over here to a J-box. And that J-box is going to be within 3 feet of the EV charger so that I can use the included liquid-tight flexible conduit, make my connection to the J-box, and splice everything through to get this bad boy powered on. So now that I have my location picked out, let's go ahead and get started with this installation. And I would definitely highly recommend that you wear the proper PPE for this installation. You're definitely going to want to have some gloves on and some safety glasses. I'm going to be installing this thing on the 48 amp mode, which means that I'm going to need to install a 60 amp breaker in my panel to protect this thing. The reason for that is because 48 amps times 1.25, which is the multiplier for a continuous load, which this thing is considered, I'm going to need a 60 amp breaker to protect this thing. I should also mention that included in the instructions, you do have this table that shows you what size circuit breaker you need, depending on which size output you want. Like I said, I want to do 48 amps, so I need a 60 amp breaker. Depending on where you have this internal dial set, you can actually hook this thing up to 16, 32, 40, or 48 amps. This is a great feature because no matter what your available circuit amperage is, you only need to buy one unit. Now, unfortunately, my panel that was already installed here, just like this when I moved into this house, is already completely full, and I don't have any room to add my 60 amp breaker, which you can see is going to take up 2 spaces because it's a double pole breaker. So what I'm going to have to do is actually free up some space by installing 2 of these tandem breakers, which you can see is the size of one breaker, but you can actually put 2 circuits on it to free up some space. Now, before I can install my tandem circuit breakers, in order to make space for my 60 amp circuit breaker, what I'm going to want to do is first shut off this main 200 amp circuit breaker. What that's going to do is it's going to shut off power to the buses behind these breakers, and it's going to make it pretty safe for me to install my circuit breakers. What I want to be very cautious of, though, and aware of, is that these lugs down here are still going to be live. So even though I'm pretty safe to work up above, if I accidentally come into contact with something down low, I could get shocked or even potentially electrocuted. And really the only way around that is to call the utility company themselves and have them pull the meter just for me to do this project. As you can see, I have just about 240 amps between phase to phase. And then after shutting off the main breaker, between phase to phase on the bus bars, I have practically 0 amps. So now, being very careful, I'm going to remove my old circuit breakers and replace them with the 2 15 amp tandem circuit breakers. This is going to free up 2 spaces in my panel to allow me to install my double pole 60 amp circuit breaker. All right, with my 60 amp breaker installed and on, let's verify for 240 volts between phases, which we got. Now, since my panel is recessed into the wall, I'm going to go ahead and pop out one of these 3/4 inch knockouts, attempt to fish 3/4 inch flex down the wall to where it will pop out down low, connect to this 3/4 inch LB, and then transition to being surface mounted EMT over to where I will set the J-box and make the connection to the EV charger. Using the specialty tool from Racketeers, I'm going to go ahead and try to pop out this 3/4 inch knockout. Boom. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Being very careful not to touch these hot phases, I'm going to fish a fish stick down the wall and just make sure that there's nothing in the way of my aluminum flex that I'm going to fish down the wall. Seems like we're all clear. Now, because I know I have these feeders that are feeding from underneath the panel, I really don't want to just take my hole saw and start drilling a 1-inch hole before knowing whether or not I'm going to hit any feeders or anything else. So I'm going to take a screwdriver and I'm just going to make a quick little hole, poke that through the wall, and just make sure that I'm not hitting anything that feels solid. Now, as you can tell, I actually did end up hitting something, so I'm really glad that I didn't just take my hole saw and start drilling a hole. After moving my hole up, I was able to push my screwdriver through the wall and verify that there was nothing behind it. And I moved my screwdriver up, down, and from side to side just to be 100% sure. I can now safely drill my hole into the wall and not worry about hitting feeders or anything else. Now I'm going to send a fish stick, or sometimes called a glow rod, up the wall and into the panel. To give the flex more mobility as I pull it up the wall, I'm going to put a piece of string through the flex connector before I attach it, and then I'm going to tape the piece of string to my fish stick. Being very careful not to touch the live lugs in the bottom of the panel, I'm going to pull my flex up using the fish stick. Now that I have my flex up to the panel, I'm going to pull it back down just a little bit so that way I can cut it to the right length that I need to put my next flex connector on and connect it to the LB. I cut the flex with a pair of diagonal cutters. It was a little tight, but I did make it fit. I'm going to cut the string and use a lock nut to connect the flex with the flex connector to the panel. And then I'm going to use a pair of channel locks to tighten the lock nut. I can cut off the excess string. Now I'm going to take a couple of quick measurements based off of where I want to place my EV charger to figure out exactly where I want to place my J-box. This is going to help me determine exactly how long the conduit run needs to be from the LB to the J-box. Now that I have my measurement, I'm going to mark out my conduit so that I know exactly where to cut it. I'm cutting my conduit using this small little conduit cutter tool since I didn't have a porta-band handy when I made this video. And since the EMT has a sharp edge after cutting it, I'm using this conduit reamer to make it smooth. Since this is in my garage, and since I always want to do quality work, I'm going to support my EMT to the wall by using one-hole straps, which is going to require me to put a box offset at each end of the conduit. One end going into the LB, and the other end going into the box that I'm going to splice my wires in. I'm going to put my 3/4 inch EMT connector on my LB and tighten it with a pair of channel locks. And before I support it, I'm going to connect one end to the EMT connector. I'm going to put a level on the pipe when I'm supporting it to the wall with a one-hole strap. And I'm going to use a zip-it anchor and a screw to make this happen. You'll notice that I'm using an impact instead of a drill like I showed in the beginning of this video. And really, for this application, either will work just fine. I'm going to put my second EMT connector on the other end of the pipe and verify that it lines up with a knockout on the 4 and 11 box that I'm choosing to use as my junction box. As you can tell, this junction box uses 1-inch knockouts, so I'm going to have to use some reducer washers that you'll see here in a little bit in order to make this connection happen. The reason I'm using a 4 and 11 box with 1-inch knockouts is because the included liquid tight conduit and connector that comes with the EV charger is 1 inch. With my 4 and 11/16 J-box nice and level, I'm going to use a pencil to mark the wall where I need to install my zip-it style anchors. I'm going to use those to fasten the box to the wall. And again, I'm using my impact for that. Now that my anchors are installed, I'm going to screw the box to the wall. And I'm going to take my level and make sure that the box is nice and level, as well as the EMT, before I support that to the wall using another one-hole strap. I'll use a pair of channel locks to tighten the connector to the box, and since this is a metal commercial box, I need to use a ground pigtail when I'm splicing everything together. So this is my completed conduit run from the panel all the way to the J-box. Now at this point, my raceway is complete and I'm ready to start mounting my EV charger. And in order to do that, I'm going to use the included template to make sure that everything is laid out exactly as it should be. This template will be a little bit more useful if you're installing your EV charger to a masonry wall. You can use a drill and a drill bit to drill out holes in the same place and the same size that are laid out on the template. That's going to ensure that all of your holes line up for the mounting plate. Now, since there's no studs where I want to mount the EV charger, I'm going to go ahead and just use more of these zip-it anchors because they hold a lot of weight and I think they're going to work out just fine in this situation. Using the template as a guide, I used a pencil to mark out the wall to know where to place these anchors. Now, you didn't see this mounting plate at the very beginning of the video when I showed everything that was included with this EV charger, and that's because this was already pre-installed to the back of the EV charging unit. I had to take it off in order to mount it, and then I'll put it back on once it's mounted. The EV charging unit easily slides onto the mounting plate, and then you can use the included security screw and security Allen wrench to secure it into place. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the security screws are especially useful if you're mounting your EV charger and your holster to the exterior of your home to prevent somebody from trying to steal it from your property. Because I'm installing my EV charger so close to the edge of my wall, I did struggle a little bit with trying to get this last screw into place, but in the end, I was able to get it fully installed. All right, so now the EV charger is mounted and it's time to connect the EV charger to the J-box using the 3 feet of included liquid tight. To know how much of this liquid tight conduit I was going to have to cut, rather than using a tape measure, I inserted the conductors into the liquid tight conduit, dry fit it to the EV charger, lined it up with the box, marked it out, and then I was ready to make my cut. Now, I didn't film myself doing it, but in order to make the cut, I just went ahead and used my skill saw. Now, like I said in the beginning, I didn't have a portaband or anything else like a hacksaw when I was filming this video. Otherwise, either one of those would have worked just fine to make the cut. So I'm using my adjustable wrench to tighten the liquid tight connector to the liquid tight flexible conduit. You do want to make sure that you're installing your liquid tight connector onto the liquid tight and to the box in the correct order. I did have to fight a little bit at this point to get the wires and the liquid tight connector with the liquid tight conduit into the box, but in the end, I was able to make it happen. It just took a little bit of work. Once everything was in the box, I tightened my lock nut to the liquid tight connector using a pair of channel locks, and I tightened the liquid tight connector above the box using my adjustable wrench. So here's what that looked like all connected. All right, so now that I have a little bit more daylight, I'm gonna go ahead and install this plug holster. Now, since my EV charger is gonna be used to charge a car that is parked in my driveway, I wanna make sure that I'm installing this on the exterior of my garage, somewhere on my house. And I think that in my situation, the best place to mount this is gonna be about the same height as this, right here. Once the base plate is mounted to the wall, the plug holster will slide right on and it will be locked into place by using the included security screw. There's no template for installing the holster, so just use a level to make sure everything is nice and square. Unfortunately, I couldn't use the included lag bolts in this situation because they were too long and would have stuck out on the other side. So I went ahead and just used these screws that I already had to mount this plate for the holster to the side of my house. And these worked out just fine. With the holster sitting on the base plate, I'm going to secure it in place using the included security screw and included security Allen wrench. So here's how the plug inserts into the holster. You just push it and it clips right in place. And to take it out, you press the button and it pulls right out. And for those wondering, it does work out just fine to have the EV charging cable run under my garage door. It's not squishing it or damaging it. Now that the EV charger is completely mounted, let's go ahead and pull wire from the panel to this J-box so that way we can get this whole thing made up and turned on. I'm going to pull my wire in using this polyester fish tape. I've said it multiple times already, but I think it's worth mentioning again. I'm very aware of the hot lugs in the bottom of my panel, and I'm being very careful not to come into contact with them as I'm feeding the fish tape down through the flex. This polyester fish tape pushed effortlessly. Through years of experience, I've found that when you're making up your head of wire, it really helps to stagger the conductors. I did struggle a little bit when I was pushing this number 8 ground through the head of my fish tape. I could have stripped it to make it a little bit thinner and push easier, but I was eventually able to get it through and bent over so that way I could tape up the rest of the head securely to the fish tape. Here I'm using the flat end of my wire strippers to pinch down on the wires and try to make them a little bit more compact to feed through the 3/4 inch EMT. The wires that I'm pulling are a number 6 red, number 6 black, and a number 8 green. And honestly, in this situation, I probably didn't need to use a fish tape to feed the conductors through the EMT, but it definitely did come in handy when I got to the flex portion that went up to the panel. After my wire was pulled in, I closed the face of my LB. In this clip, I'm cutting all of my wires to the correct length where I will be able to fold them up and close them in the box, but still allowing myself to have enough length to work with the wires and get them all spliced together. I'm splicing the wires together by using the big blue wire nuts from Ideal, which are rated for number 6 conductors. I do think that it's worth mentioning that before I filmed this video and installed this EV charger, I double checked that everything that I'm doing is up to code. I even reached out to a local inspector to ensure that everything that I'm doing today in this video is legit. I do want to point out, however, that different states have different specific codes, and some states may have different rules or codes than others. So you're going to want to double check that before completing your EV install. I did notice one thing that I probably should have done in this video, and that is support my Liquid-Tech conduit coming out of my EV charger going to my junction box with some 1-hole straps. But other than that, everything should be 100% up to code. All right, so now that my J-box is made up, I'm gonna go ahead and route these wires up this side of the panel and land them on the brand new 60 amp circuit breaker. As you can see, the main circuit breaker is still turned off, so I don't have so much risk up here, but I still could potentially get shocked or even electrocuted if I come into contact with these hot lugs down here. So I still have to treat this like a live panel and be very careful. With the shelf that I have on the left side of my panel, it really kind of limited any sort of good shot that I was able to get filming myself landing these wires on the ground bar and on the breakers. But hopefully you can see well enough here to get the general idea of how I'm making this happen. Because of my limited space, I did struggle to get this last wire in the 60 amp breaker, but in the end, I got it. With my panel all made up and making sure that I didn't leave any tools on the inside, I'm going to go ahead and put the cover of my panel back on. Here's the moment of truth. You can see the Legrand EV charger cycling through the different colors as it powers on, but the solid blue color means that it is on standby and ready to be plugged in. And just like that, we have a fully installed, ready to use level 2 hardwired EV charger from Legrand. I think the most difficult thing about this install, and really any EV charger install, is going to be finding exactly where you want to mount it and how exactly you're going to get power out of the panel to power the unit itself. Conduit run and wire pull aside, the actual install of this level 2 EV charger from Legrand was very simple, very straightforward, and the instructions made it very clear. If you're looking to buy a level 2 EV charger for your home, if you want some versatility and you want a really quality unit, I would highly recommend this level 2 EV charger from Legrand. Thanks for watching and have a good one.